This is about proper tree trimming suggestions and guidelines. And this is at the suggestion point right now, not written in stone. And that's why I just have that 2019, 2020. Also, the age of our trees is going to matter. So as our trees get older and more mature and taller, we're going to change these standards over time. So this is just kind of to get you to wrap your brain around this for what's coming. How about that? I've talked to many account managers from different companies that work at different HOAs and asked them, what is the height that you require in your HOA to have for clearance from the sidewalk to the bottom of the tree, where it's pointing up there at the red arrow to the 10 foot there. And in many communities it ranges from 10 foot to 14 foot on the sidewalk. And when I went around with Don Wells with a pole that we had structured together and had it marked at 10 foot and at 14 foot, 14 foot is way up there. This particular tree is in town here and it measured right at 10 foot. So I thought this would be a good example to show you how nice that is at 10 foot to have that clearance. Some of our goals that we had in mind when we were trying to figure out how high to go with this is you have to have light on the shrubs down below or they don't do well. A lot of people in town have spent a lot of money and effort. Those happen to be crotons right there. And they get like a black sooty mold on them and they get all these other diseases and things like that. And same thing with the turf. You struggle and you can't keep your turf healthy. A lot of that is because of not having the airflow to go underneath and also the sunlight to hit it. So now if we raise our standard up to where everybody has to have it 10 foot at the sidewalk, you're going to have a lot more airflow and a lot more sun and a lot healthier yard. Notice also the sidewalks. It really does help in the Southwest Florida area to have the airflow and the sun to keep it from turning black mold the day after you power wash it. So this is going to help everybody a lot. It's going to help the look and the aesthetic of the town and the health of our flora. Just everything is going to look brighter and better, and everybody will be able to appreciate that. I don't think we need to go to 14 foot. So we thought, let's just start off baby steps, and we'll call it 10 foot at the minimum of what the other HOAs are doing from here to Naples. On our esplanade, what we have contracted for is 12 foot, but I think 10 is good enough on the side streets, on the homes. Don Wells. I just want to take just a second. Don Wells and Al Roper help so much all the time in every aspect. I'm not sure anybody is aware how many hours these guys are doing and volunteering outside of the realm of their volunteer job position. So anyway, I appreciate them both greatly. The goals for the clearance on the street, they range 14 foot to 21 foot, depending on what town that you're in, and there's a reason for that. You need enough clearance for vehicles to be able to stay in their own lane, and there are some streets in town where that's not been possible, because I drive every street in town checking on the landscape situations, and there's many times on some of our streets where I have to wait for other cars to come through because we can't both fit because people's oak trees are out into the lanes. And then you're going to get your vehicles scratched, your paint scratched, or what have you. We don't want the trees damaged by moving vans or garbage trucks either. Fire trucks need to have clear travel as well, and they're pretty big. So that 14 foot is probably about as minimum as we want to go. And again, it's baby steps because that's the age and height of our trees right now. When our trees get older, we can raise that up as we need to. But I think that this is a good starting point for us. Point in fact, Researching, I found out all moving vans are at 13.6, so 14 foot, we can have the moving vans come in. When I was an account manager that took care of landscape for Somerville, it just was horrifying that when the moving vans came through town and I happened to be there, they crunched right into your big, beautiful oak trees and ripped them and broke the branches, big, heavy branches, just ripped out, and a lot of the limbs just lit to the ground and then had to wait for a pickup in the future. But that left such weeping, gaping holes in the branches, and that subjects your trees to disease and decay. So when I pulled this, I was looking for somewhere it's going to hit into a tree. All I could find was hitting bridges. But you're going to get the point. If that was a big, beautiful oak that's in front of your house, and that moving van comes in, like I saw happen several times in Somerville, or the garbage trucks, correct. I also look for heights on those. So it's the same as the moving van. As long as when they're doing that side, they dump it in front of the truck first, and then they go 3 or 4 houses till that's full, and then they put it up over, that's over 21 foot. So I've been watching them, Waste Pro, and they have been doing 3 or 4 till there's a house without an oak tree, and then they do that flip. So they're being pretty cognizant for us. So far, so good. Good point, thank you. The DOT does mandate that bridges be 14 to 16 foot, and that's the reason, because the moving vans are 13.6. And gosh forbid that they go over a big rock underneath there at that time. With that being said, with increasing the standard and the expectations, and maybe making a deed where we're going to enforce 10 foot on the sidewalks and 14 on the streets, a lot of people have taken it upon themselves or hired people to come in that you think are experts on tree trimming and trim your trees, because I've been there to pick up the aftermath with the homeowners, patting each other on the back and crying over the poor trees that have gotten demolished by people they paid good money to have the trimming done. There's a very specific way that oak trees and shady lady trees, are 2 main hardwoods in town here, need to be trimmed, or you do sometimes irreparable damage to the tree. It's kind of hard to tell from these pictures, but if I use this one over here, you can see it definitely has this area here that's all wrinkled like an elephant's foot. That's a very important part of the tree. And what I've noticed a lot of the people that were doing the trimming was doing was not the mandatory 3-cut cut. In other words, you have at the end of this branch a very long, very heavy, very, very heavy branch or limb that's going to come down. And if you just cut just like that to saw it off like you think you should be able to, and you start up here and you're sawing down, what's going to happen is this bark is a skin, and it peels off and strips down the whole side of the tree, leaving the whole tree open for fungus and pest infestation. And that's very hard on the tree, and you might lose the tree, or it might get really bad looking for a long time. So what you have to do is first take all this weight off. So what you do is you make this initial number 1 cut over here, so that if it does out of weight crash or fall down, it's not going to strip this bark any farther than this cut. Does that make sense? So after you make this initial cut, and that's only to keep the skin from peeling down the side of the tree as the limb falls, then you can go back and make your cut here to take the weight off, so the big heavy branch can fall and it's not going to hurt anything. If it's a really big heavy branch, make several of those along the way till you get closer to the trunk, so that you're not hurting something, having something that big land on the ground below you. It's also easier to cut it up there before it gets to the ground, and especially if it's a chainsaw situation, you don't want to chainsaw into the dirt. That's a safety hazard as well. Okay, so back to this picture. So I've got all the weight off, and now I have this ugly little stem here, which was left on a lot of trees in town for people who paid to have their trees trimmed. Now you have to go in and see this spot right here where the elephant skin starts, in this spot here. You follow that line so you're not hurting any of this tissue here. And then the tree can heal itself, like it makes a little skin right there, and will make a bark to cover it over time. And then it doesn't get fungus and it doesn't get it pest infestation. It heals that spot fairly quickly. I hope this helps everybody if you're DIYs or if you're hiring somebody other than a professional arborist, because they cost more. People try to save money and they hire a lot of the ones that you see around town. But then it behooves you to stand out there with them and say, oh, wait a minute, you've got to do it this way. And if they give you that deer in the headlight look, you know you need to find somebody else. So that's how we trim our oaks and our shady ladies for best luck. And this just shows multiple ones around, whether it's hardwood or conifer, where they're doing the 3-point cut. In those pictures on the left, they're actually cutting off big ones on either side so that they can be lifting for your 10-foot deed restriction coming up. The other thing is you need to have kind of an eye for what's going on with your tree. The red are the ones that you would want to trim out if you're doing it yourself, or if you have somebody hired to come, because a lot of them are not being done correctly. So if you have 2 leaders at the top, you can take one out, but remember how you have to make the cut at the edge of that thickening of the elephant skin so that it can heal over. So you have one sturdy one that's always going to go up to the top. Never, ever, ever cut the top of your tree off. That's like rule number 1. It's really hard on the tree, and it's not allowed by a lot of codes around states in the United States. Could actually get fined for that in some states, for trimming it wrong. So if you have malformed branches or branches with some boo-boos on it from something else hitting it, those are ones that you would choose to take off. Where you have multiples coming off, where you have some aiming back in towards the trunk of the tree, straight up and down ones are called sucker ones. Those often get trimmed off. And over here, this goes for this tree, but also goes for if one of these was a branch from a neighboring tree, because what some of the builders did was plant trees too close together in some of our yards. And then you've got an oak branch rubbing on a shady lady branch next to each other, and they're doing this. As it rubs, it makes a wound, and it gets sappy, and that attracts more bugs and more pests, and bad things can happen. So what you want to do is go in and take the rubbing ones out. If one isn't scarred and only one is, leave the healthy one on the other tree there. Take the one that's been rubbed raw. If they're both rubbed raw, they could both come out. So you would take these off in the same way. So I take that one off there and this one off there, and then I don't have any more rubbing going on, and I have less chance of the tree getting diseased, and the tree has a better aesthetic look as well. This is how we trim for clearance for our height restriction to get up to that 10 foot over your sidewalk. So you would trim this just the way we talked about earlier. You'd cut off this edge first with your 3-point cut, and then move closer and do it here. Any suckers going straight up at the bottom, you want to take those out, because it's just going to grow up when it gets big and fat like this side is. It's going to be crowding it, and what you get is all the dirt and waste trapped between them, and then you have disease. And then you lose your whole tree. This is the only way that you would ever take off of a rut. Oak trees and shady lady trees, as they get older, your front yard fills in with those really big, long snakes. That's part of that tree. That's part of how the tree's being is. We all have things that look different as we get older, and so do those trees. But if one is girdling the tree or wrapping around the tree like that one there is, then that's the only time you should take off one of the rut ones. So if you have oak or shady lady in your front yard where there's grass around it, probably 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you're not going to have grass. You're going to be going to some other alternative, like a bromeliad garden or something like that can take the shade and not be fighting for every ounce of nutrition that oak or shady lady's taking. Planning for the future. This is what I talked about before. Absolutely never supposed to cut the tops off of the trees. That's called hat racking because you can hang your hat on each one. It is so hard on the tree, it's unbelievable. If you think about all of the leaves at the top, that takes the sunshine and it takes that energy from the sun and makes food or sap or sugar for the tree. It sends down to the roots, right? The roots suck up the water to keep the trigger pressure in the leaves, which makes them all plump and happy and say, I'm here. Okay, so you cut that off the top, that tree is in panic mode. It's like you've stopped eating for 3 weeks, you're hungry. So that tree is going to throw as many sprouts, or those water sucker things, up to fight that, to try to survive, because you have almost killed that tree when you cut the tops off like that. Your insurance might not cover storm damage down the road if you've done that, because as these grow and get bigger, they are totally weak. That is not structurally sound. You can see right here the structural soundness is the straight up of the original fat one. All these little ones that come up in response to incorrect pruning, if you see those sprouts, it's due to an incorrect pruning. It's that fighting response of that tree. So when they get bigger, to fill in that greenery again, you get a rain event, the leaves get heavy, then you get a wind event, and it comes off and does damage. And a lot of times, some insurance companies will send somebody out to look at that, so then you might not be covered, depending on how good their adjuster is. Okay. Been seeing some of this too, you guys. Lion's tails might be cute on these little guys, but lion tail trimming is bad for your tree. All the weight is on the end of that branch. Those branches happen to be straight up and down, but you also see it on the sides. So if you can imagine, if I had a 15-pound weight just in my hand, instead of spreading it out from shoulder to hand, it's going to break off, right?
Right.
So, y'all see what I mean by the lion's tails? Yes, it was rhetorical. Okay, the lion's tailing, what that does to your tree, it causes those end-heavy branches, causes branch failure and breakage, sun scalding. Nature put those leaves there to help protect and shade it, just like the trees shade you. Rapid sucker growth, we talked about that. Rotting and cracks as a result of it. Increased disease and insect vulnerability, and severe stress to the tree. So why is it wrong? Well, the tree's food supply is reduced by removing that large percentage of leaves used for photosynthesis. And over-pruning causes a stress reaction, and that's what we talked about a minute ago, that epicormic sprouting, or water sprouts or suckers. And it causes a clustering of those branches to grow on the trunk and limbs, leading to weak branch unions and poor overall structure. Also, long leafless branches are susceptible to breakage and splitting with the wind and rain.
We have a list of 5 things that they're going to look for when they say the tree needs to be trimmed. Do you have that with you that Jerry sent us?
A list of 5 things?
Yes,
About what?
he sent us an email with those 5. Would you go over those, Jerry, and tell everyone, if you get a violation or a suggestion that your tree needs to be trimmed, this is what needs to be done. The height, keep it away from your houses. It doesn't mean that you have to trim the whole tree from top to bottom and the sides and everything. You know, you want it to still look like a nice shade tree with a canopy, and go over those 5 things.
Yeah, so a few of them we've talked about already. So one would be the height of the canopy over sidewalks, height of the canopy over streets, which we've discussed, and then trees growing into other trees, which we've discussed, trees growing into houses, which I don't know if you mentioned, but yeah.
You should have several feet because, for several reasons. Number one, when the wind blows,
When you need several feet of space between the tree and the house. When the wind blows, the tree's going to move and it's going to scratch your paint and rip off your stucco. And I talked about that at a previous board meeting. And also you need air movement around your house. Otherwise you get the molds and things in your house. Also, all of the bugs travel from the trees into your home. they can walk right over, jump right over, and get into your soffits and everywhere else and invade from the inside. So there's multiple reasons, but you need space.
And the last thing, the fifth one would be those shoots or shooters, where some of the trees you've seen that haven't been touched in 3 or 4 years, almost looks like a bad haircut, all these shooters, that wild hairs just growing out. So those would be the 5 things that we're looking for.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the presentation that you just made, you know, informing everybody of how harmful it is for the tree and everything. But I wanted to add on to that I have done some Googling, and I have learned that in Lee County, these things that you talk about are actually illegal. There are, so it's on the books that if any landscapers or homeowners are found guilty of topping your tree or rounding the tree or lion-tailing it, as you were talking about, it's on the books. I imagine they don't actually follow through in most of these cases, but so people get away with it. But I think that, so anyway, you can be fined, and it actually can go to the point where you are asked to replace the tree that you damaged.
And in some cases, you have to replace 3 trees for one if you get them that enough at you.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Mhm.
I think so.
But you
I
have to
think-
look at the date on
yeah.
that. That was dated 2008, and that's why
Yes.
we did not bring that up at this presentation time, because they probably have an updated one, and we didn't want to, you know, say it's 100 for this, 300 for the next, and 500
Oh,
for the
yes.
next, per tree, by the way. Because on the Lee County site that we found it, it is dated 2008, and I
Yes, that's what
imagine
they
they've
said.
updated that in their books, but maybe not on their webpage.
But I would imagine that still the same guidelines would be there.
I'm sure.
I'm sure that.
Yeah, all these things that we mentioned here are actually violations that Lee County
So I-
cites people for.
I think that as our community, we should endeavor to follow the law.
Well,
Okay, so in conclusion, trimming your tree doesn't mean it has to go from 20 feet to 10 feet to 8 feet. It just means you need to lift it so that it's 10 feet over the sidewalk, 14 feet if it's hanging over the street. It's okay to hang over the street. If our community matures and there's a total canopy over the street that is 14 feet or higher, then everything can still come in here. So that's what's going to make the community look good, not making our tree much smaller and trimming it in those manners. So enough about tree trimming, and we're all set to move on to the next.